Hi, welcome to this lesson. We're going to continue on from where we left off in the previous lesson, talking about methods and how we can invoke them in another class. And I'm going to start going over what this line means exactly, okay? I know I've been hiding it from you throughout the previous lessons, but now I think it's about time we go over exactly what this is saying. So there are some keywords involved here in purple, as you can see: public, static, void. You should have already understood what void is from the previous lesson. Let's review what void was. If we go back to the myutils class, notice that some of these methods have void right here, right? And void means that they don't return anything. This method right here does not have void. It has string. So that means when you call this method from anywhere, it's going to actually return a data that is of type string. Same thing goes for this guy right here. Add10 was a method that was also returning integer data. So that's why we put int here before the method name. But these two methods, such as print_some_junk with an integer argument and sum_2_numbers that's taking these two arguments, these two methods are actually not returning anything. Even if you look at the body of this method, all it is doing is printing to the screen, but it doesn't actually use the return keyword. All right, like you see up here and down here, it's returning in the body of these methods, but here it's not returning anything, and that's why it's the definition of this method has this void. All right, and same thing goes for this one. It's not returning anything. By the way, this line here where the method name and the arguments and all of these keywords are explained, this is known as the method signature. All right, just a vocabulary word for you to keep in mind when you hear it. This first line with all the keywords and the arguments and the method name, that's referred to as the method signature, okay? And the rest of it inside of these brackets, this is the method body. This is where we put the list of instructions on what this method is going to do when it is invoked. So if we go back to our class that contains a main method, this void basically means that this method doesn't return anything. It does stuff as it's doing here, but it's not going to return anything to whatever calls it, okay? And this is just a standard signature for the main method. Every Java program must have this main method. Otherwise, the application just cannot run. This is the entry point for every Java application out there, okay? And then it goes line by line, executing each line of instruction, all right? So now coming over to this public keyword. This public keyword is known as an access modifier. And what this basically is for is to manage visibility of methods and variables. So if I was to create another class, let me do that right now. Or as a matter of fact, instead of creating another class, let me just go in here and change this method to a private. So I'm going to make this method private. Okay? Hover your mouse here on this warning sign. It says the method print_some_junk taking an integer argument. This type is never used locally. So this should give you some hint that this method should be used locally if we change this to a private. If I move it back to a public, of course the warning disappears. But when I make it private, the warning is there. Hover your mouse here and it's saying, the method print_some_junk from the type myutils, right, this is the class name, is never used locally. So just adding this private keyword is telling Eclipse that, hey, I expect to see this method being used locally, and it's not. And why would it be used locally? Why can't it be used in another class? Well, let's go down here and let's try to invoke that method. If I type in myutils dot, notice there are three methods available to us right now. The add10, this takes an integer argument and returns an integer. This print_some_junk, which takes a string argument and returns a string data, and sum_2_numbers. Okay, so we have four methods in the myutils class, but over here we only see three of them. So what's going on? Let's go back here. This method called print some junk. This takes an integer argument, okay, and it doesn't return anything, it's void, but it takes an integer argument. If we go back here, and if I press Control and space, it's going to bring up that dialog box again. Notice that none of the methods listed here is the method that we made private, right? These are the public methods. And the method that we just made private, that one was supposed to take an int as an argument, okay? That was also called print some junk, but it was taking an integer as an argument. So that's clearly not visible here. So if I try to invoke this print some junk and pass in an integer, let's do that. Print some junk, and we pass it an integer such as 87. Hover your mouse here, and it's saying the method print some junk from the type myutils is not visible. Okay, it's not visible. So the reason for that is because I've made this a private method. So if I change it back to public, now this is not going to complain, right? There's no red squiggly line here giving an error because it is visible. And again, if I put my mouse here and press Control space, it brings that dialog box with the multiple methods. And notice that now, since I made that method public, it's right here. It's available. It's visible to us in this class. Okay. But if I make this private, if I make this method private, if I make it private and we go back, it's got a problem. It's not visible. So similarly, I can go back and let's change this add 10 to also be private, right? And again, that warning sign shows up. It's saying this method is not being used locally. Hover your mouse, it's saying this method from the type myutils is the class is never used locally. So the Eclipse compiler is smart enough to see, is this method being called anywhere else in this class? It's not being called anywhere else in this class. So of course, it gives a warning and say, if this is a private method, then of course, the only place that this should be called is in this class. And it's warning us saying, I don't see this being called here in this class. And again, if we go back here, not only is print some junk going to complain, but if I uncomment, where's that other method we had? Right here, add 10. So if I uncomment that, notice that that error is highlighted underneath here. It's saying the method add 10 int from the type myutils is not visible, okay? Because we've made that also private. So let's change this back to public and change this back to public. And now we have no errors, okay? So that's called an access modifier, and it can go as part of the method signature, right? This is the method signature for the main method, right? Or it can also go at the class level. So for example, this is a public class. It's accessible throughout my entire project called Java Basics. In this entire project, even if I create a new package, let me create a new package. If I go to new and say package, I can call this some other package. Yep. And of course, this is not the best named package. I'm just showing you an example here. We're going to go into the more practical naming conventions when that part of the course comes. But right now, we're just discussing the basics. So I just created another package. And if I create a class in here, let's just create an example. I'm just going to call it example class and hit finish. In this class, I can also define a method, right? Let's do public static void do something. Okay, this method does something, not important of what exactly it does. Of course, I didn't put any instructions here, so it doesn't do anything useful at all. But I did this to highlight the point to you that in this method, I can invoke myutils.printsomejunk. Let me copy this and go here. And there you go. But if I was to go back to the myutils class, and by the way, there's no error here, it's not complaining. But if I was to go back to the myutils class and change this from being public to no modifier. Let me get rid of that. And now it's just the class keyword with the class name. There's no modifier. It doesn't say public. Notice that there's an error in this class. If we click here, it's got two errors here. One of them is right here at the import. It's actually importing that particular class that's defined in the Java Basics package. Right now, this example class that I created is actually in this some other package that I made. In this some other package, we've created this class, example class, and it's indicated right here, package, some other package. That's where this class belongs. But we are importing the class from javabasics.myutils because it belongs in another package, which is called Java Basics. But it's giving an error. Hover your mouse here, and it's saying the type javabasics.myutils is not visible. Okay? So because I took out the public keyword from the beginning of the class definition, it's no longer visible. Now in learning methods class, over here there's no error, right? And the reason for that is because learning methods is in the same package. It's in the same package called Java Basics, right? Same package as myutils. So myutils and learning methods are both in the same package, and that is why this class is not complaining about myutils being invisible, right? It's clearly sees it. It's in the same package, even though there's no public here. But outside of the package, this example class that belongs in this some other package, this is not able to see this myutils class, right? Because myutils is not public. So of course, this is giving an error, and this line is not going to work either. It's saying myutils cannot be resolved. It doesn't know where this thing is. So if I go back to this class and make this public, now the error is gone. So let's go back to example class. Even though it's in some other package, it's still able to see myutils because it can clearly import the class here, because this is a public class. I've changed this to public. All right, so it's all working now. So I'll give you a quick assignment. Let's go back to this other class that we defined in the some other package. It's called example class. I'd like for you to invoke this method in the learning methods class. So this should be very straightforward. Try it out on your own, and then you can resume to watch my solution. Alright, so hopefully that wasn't too bad. It's actually meant to be pretty easy. All you have to do is type example class dot do something right here. And there you go. And I wanted you to notice something. As soon as I finished typing it, this import line showed up on the top. And this is showing that this example class, it belongs in some other package, but we need to import that code into this class definition, right? Because we're using this class that belongs in some other package, we need to import. We need to import because it belongs in some other package. myutils does not need an import because it belongs in the same package as Java Basics. Okay, so I just hit Control Save to save the class before I run it. And before I run it, by the way, let me just comment this line out. If I get rid of this line, notice it's going to complain. Hover your mouse here, and it's saying example class cannot be resolved. So it gives some quick fixes, and the first fix right here says import example class from this some other package. So the Eclipse compiler is smart enough to recognize that we have this class that's in this package. So let's click here, and of course it imports up there. All right, let me get rid of this old import that we had. I commented that out. Now, of course, if I run it, everything should be working, and this is the output of invoking this method right here, do something. And again, what does do something do? We can go to the class in which it's defined. It's defined in the example class. Let's go to the example class. Let's look at the body of this method. In the body of this method, it invokes myutils.print_some_junk. Okay, and of course myutils is imported in this class because to this class myutils is in the other package called Java Basics. All right, so we covered a lot of ground in this lesson, and this was to prepare you for the next few lessons where we talk about object orientation. Very, very important for this course. It's actually the foundation for the entire Java language. And if you understand the next few lessons and you take the time to study them, the rest of the study process in Java should be straightforward. A lot of courses take the object orientation aspects of Java lightly, and that's why students are not able to learn advanced concepts easily, because they're missing fundamental ground. So the next couple of lessons, about 4 or 5 of them, we're going to be thoroughly delving into object orientation. We're going to talk about interfaces, abstract classes, what are objects, what are instances, and so on. But before that, though, I did promise you one thing, and that was to demystify the main method, right? So let's go back to the Learn Methods class. This main method right here, you've already seen the array data type, okay? So it's getting this argument, this variable is the argument to this method, and the data type of this argument is actually a string array. And this just allows users of this program to be able to invoke this program from the command line, and we're going to take a look at that later in the course. But understand that this is an argument, and the data type that it takes is this string array, okay? So you've seen the public, this is the access modifier, you've seen void, right, which means this method does not return anything. You've seen the arguments, you've seen the name of the method. One last thing that's still unclear to you probably is this static keyword. So let me take a few minutes to explain to you what this static keyword means. Now, to highlight that point, if I go to my utils and let me just actually clear some of the screen here. Let me clear the screen entirely, so we'll start fresh. And notice that it's giving us a little warning. It's saying the import some other package example class is never used, because of course we cleared the screen here. So we can Control Shift and press O, and that's going to clean up those unused imports. Okay, so we got rid of that, and now we're back to the start. So to understand what this static keyword means, what I'm going to do is go back to the myutils class, and I'm going to remove this static keyword from this add 10 method signature. Okay, I've removed it. There's no errors up to this point, right? So now let's try to invoke this method in the Learning Methods class. So I could do myutils dot, notice there's print some junk with an integer argument, there's print some junk with the string argument, and there's sum two numbers. You're not going to see the add 10 method, right? That's not there anymore. Let's go back to here. The add 10 method now is not going to be accessible to this class directly. These methods, such as print some junk with a string argument, an integer argument, and sum two numbers, these three methods are accessible to this class directly, and we can invoke these methods by referencing the class directly, because these methods belong to this class. But this add 10 actually does not directly belong to this class. It belongs to the instance of this class, not this class directly. And this is going to make a lot more sense in the object-oriented section that we're going to start, starting next lesson. But let's go back here. I cannot do add 10, all right? And the reason is, well, let's hover our mouse here. It's saying cannot make a static reference to the non-static method right here. So this should give you a hint that every time we invoke a method with this myutils class, we are making a static reference. But since in this class I removed the static keyword from the add 10 method, I removed that static keyword, we can no longer invoke it directly like this in a static way. These other methods are static methods, so we can invoke them directly by just referencing the class. But for this method, there is a little bit of extra syntax that we need to implement. And let me show you that syntax right now. What we need to do is create an instance of myutils. So we could do my utils, and I can create a variable called my var, like that. So I have a variable called my var, and its data type is actually the class, right? The class my utils. So not only can you have integer, string, boolean, double data types, but you can also have classes as data types, right? And we're going to cover this in a lot more detail in the coming lessons on object orientation. So now that I have declared the variable here, I haven't assigned it any data. So let's assign it something. My var, and we need to actually assign this, new my utils, okay? This is what is required to be able to call add 10 on it. So I'm going to do my var dot add 10. There you go. You see that method? It's available to this variable. It was not available to the class directly. It's available to this variable that is of type that class. So notice that my var has some other methods such as equals, hash code, blah blah blah, but there is one method that we have defined that's called add 10. Now coming down here, it has print some junk, it has sum two numbers as well. If we click on it and we give, for example, some data, notice it gives a warning. Hover your mouse here and it's saying the static method print_some_junk from the type myutils should be accessed in a static way. All right, since this is a static method, it should be accessed in a static way. Right now we are accessing it in a non-static way. We are actually using a variable, an instance. We're using an instance of this class, not the class directly. So to get rid of this warning, we actually need to do that, and the warning will disappear. But for the add 10 method, I cannot do that. It doesn't even show up here. For the add 10 method, I can use my var dot add 10. Okay, this is going to make a lot more sense coming up with object orientation. I just wanted to give you an overview to get your brain thinking in that direction. But this is a class, and we've defined a variable of that type. And then we've assigned this variable an instance, right? An instance, an object. This is referred to as an object variable. This has the functionality to be able to invoke methods that are non-static in the myutils class. So this has the ability to invoke methods such as this one that don't have the static keyword. Okay, this was sort of a high-level overview. I haven't gone into the details as to why the static keyword is needed, and when you remove it, why do we need to have this variable. So all of that we're going to cover in starting from the next lesson onwards. There's a course that I created not too long ago on mastering object orientation, and the prerequisite section of that course was all about object orientation. So those lectures are going to follow this particular lesson. So make sure you pay full attention in those lectures. There's about 5 of them. So thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.